guys, it's Marc Zicree, Mr. Sci-Fi, also known as Marc Zicree of Space Command. And today I'm taking a request. Wintersbone, one of our Mr. Sci-Fi subscribers, has asked me to do my commentary and reminiscence about Ray Harryhausen. So this is for you, Wintersbone, and all of us other wonderful Ray Harryhausen fans, and I'm happy to do it. This may be a long one as well, so definitely grab your favorite beverage or whatever you whatever gives you comfort, and we'll get into this right now. So, I hope that you all know who Ray Harryhausen is. If you do not, immediately go and watch one of his amazing and wonderful films. Those would include Mysterious Island, Jason and the Argonauts, Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, Golden Voyage of Sinbad, Clash of the Titans, the original one, on and on. First Men on the Moon. There are so many wonderful, wonderful films that Harryhausen made. But here's what makes him unique and just one of my favorite people of all time. When I was a kid, growing up in the 60s and 70s, particularly early on when I was a little kid, there were really only two filmmakers who were making wonderful, wonder-filled science fiction and fantasy films. And those two men were George Pal, science fiction film producer George Pal, and Ray Harryhausen. And you know, nowadays when you see films that are even good science fiction films, even something entertaining like Guardians of the Galaxy, these are, or the new Star Wars film, they may be made by people who have great enthusiasm for the projects, but ultimately they're product. The studio is putting them out to make hundreds of millions or even over $1 billion, as with Avatar. They're looking at everything as part of the deal, to make toys, to make video games, to make ancillary products. They're seeing it essentially as something they can market. But when I was a kid, George Pal and Ray Harryhausen were both doing films that came from an enormous personal enthusiasm. You could tell that they just delighted in this kind of story and this kind of film. And today we're going to be talking about Ray Harryhausen. Now, I'll talk about George Pal in another one of my Mr. Sci-Fi pieces. But for now, let's talk about Harryhausen, because I actually worked with Harryhausen. He and I did a project. We're working on a project called Ray Harryhausen Presents, which I'll talk about in the next few minutes. But let me just start with my first experience of Harryhausen. When I was a kid, when I was, gosh, I must have been 7 or 8 years old, there was a summer where one of the movie theaters here in Los Angeles had a deal where I think for $1, a mother could buy tickets for their kids for 10 movies, 10 movie days. And they would show movies that were not new films, but were fairly recent. They were all science fiction and fantasy films, and that's how I first saw Jason and the Argonauts, Robinson Crusoe on Mars, many films that I love now. And Ray Harryhausen, it was very clear very early on, the moment you saw a Harryhausen film, you knew that you were in the presence of a master and someone who was very, very special. And many of you, I'm sure, have your favorite Ray Harryhausen moments: the battle with the skeletons on the staircase, or the Eohippus in Valley of Guanji is one of my wife's favorite, this miniature prehistoric horse that Harryhausen did. And but I think what makes him singular, because I can think of another one of this, because many films have the director's stamp on them, like Spielberg, or a writer's stamp on them, or a producer's stamp on them, like George Pal. Ray Harryhausen was not a writer or a producer or a director. He was a special effects guy, specifically a stop-motion animator. And yet these were Ray Harryhausen films. At one point, one of the directors on one of his films was trying to pull rank, and that director was Read the Riot Act by Harryhausen's producer, Charles Schneer, which, by the way, is a great name for a producer. And he very quickly came to understand that Ray Harryhausen was the creative force on those films. And Harryhausen decided what the subject would be. He decided what the set pieces would be. He basically had total creative control over these films. And I, of course, met Harryhausen at conventions. He would come to many of the conventions. Another thing I love about science fiction, and also he and Ray Bradbury were friends from their teen years, from when they were first 16 or so. And so both of them talked to me about the beginnings of that friendship and how that friendship developed. And I was very, very lucky to have these two great and amazing men in my life. And both of them were very gentle spirits, very loving and enthusiastic people. Ray Bradbury once said, "Lean forward, and I'll tell you a secret." And he whispered in my ear, "I'm 13 years old." And I think that was true of Harryhausen also. But one thing that Harryhausen told me about the two of them was, he said, Ray always liked the future, I always preferred the past. And although he did science fiction films, including First Man on the Moon, and he also tried to get a stop-motion version of War of the Worlds made, and you can actually see some of that test footage on some of the DVDs of his work. He liked mythology, greatly liked mythology. So Jason, of Jason and the Argonauts, Sinbad, these were characters who were ready-made for him. And so essentially what the beginning of Ray Harryhausen's career was when he was a teenager, when he was around 13 years old. The original King Kong came out in 1933, and Willis O'Brien was the great stop-motion animation of that era, and King Kong was his great masterpiece. And Harryhausen told me that he grew up in L.A. just as Ray Bradbury did, and he was going by a movie theater, and if you ever watch the original King Kong, most of King Kong is a little model about yay high, a stop-motion model, and that's Kong. And my friend Bob Burns owns that armature of the original Kong. In fact, the Smithsonian offered him $1 million for it, and he wouldn't sell it, which I think is, again, a testament how much we all love these things, and how much we're pure spirits in that way. It's not about money. It's never about money. It's always about the love of it. And so Harryhausen told me that he was like 13 years old, and he was going by the movie theater, and every now and then they'll have a close shot of King Kong in the original version, and there's a gigantic head with moving eyes and a moving mouth, and that was on exhibit in the front of the movie theater, the actual head from the production. And Harryhausen just walked up to that thing, and he couldn't get enough of it. And when he saw stop motion in that film, he was determined to make his own stop motion project. So even as a teenager, he got a hold of a movie camera. I think it was a 16mm camera, and took his mom's old fur coat and cut it up and made his own little. I think he made a cave bear. They started animating. He started making dinosaurs, and Ray Bradbury was a huge fan of dinosaurs as well, and so they struck up a friendship because they both loved dinosaurs. And there was a science fiction club called LOSFAS, the Los Angeles Science Fantasy Association. It's still in existence, and they became two of the founding members of that organization. And so they would get together, they would hang out, they would talk about their big dreams. They would have dreams of becoming amazing, famous fantasists, and they both made it. They both succeeded, and they were friends until their deaths. They both made it into their 90s, and there are photos of them as old men hanging around together, and you can see just the huge love they have for each other. And so Harryhausen started working on stop motion, and in no time at all, his work came to the attention of Willis O'Brien, the great Willis O'Brien, whose nickname was Obie, and O'Brien hired him to work on Mighty Joe Young, which was another film with a stop motion animated giant ape, not the size of Kong, but amazingly rendered as well. And then Harryhausen decided he would start making his own films. And one of the films he worked on was The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, which was based on a Ray Bradbury short story called The Lighthouse. Ray was walking along the beach one night, and he saw the skeletal remnants of a roller coaster from the old Ocean Park Pier. And he said, there's a dinosaur skeleton. And he started envisioning what would happen if the call of a lighthouse, the foghorn from a lighthouse, would be a dinosaur's mating call, and it would call a dinosaur up out of the water. And the illustration of that magazine story, a producer saw it and decided to make a movie of that, and Ray Harryhausen was hired to animate The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms. This was in the 1950s. And Harryhausen then went on to make these amazing films, and I, as I said, I started seeing them in my childhood because they were made in the 1950s and into the 60s. And the moment I saw Jason and the Argonauts, I was hooked. I just loved that film, and I loved how the gods were presented. I was a huge fan of Greek and Roman mythology at that point. And so, you know, my friend Mel Gilden says the golden age of science fiction is 13, and so all of us at that 13 or even younger, we find those things to speak to our heart. And so Harryhausen went on to make all of these great films, and we all loved them. But by the time Star Wars came out, his methods were somewhat old-fashioned, and Clash of the Titans, you can now watch it and really enjoy it. The original, I vastly prefer it to the remake, the recent one, which was made for 100 times the cost and has, I think 1/100th of the charm. And so you can watch Clash of the Titans now and enjoy it and see it as a companion piece to Jason and the Argonauts. But when it came out in the late 70s, it seemed a little wheezy at that point. Its techniques seemed old-fashioned when you compared them to Star Wars and the amazing films that were coming out, Aliens and Blade Runner. And so at that point, Harryhausen decided to stop making his own films, and then became sort of an advisor to the younger generation of filmmakers who all loved him, from Tim Burton to Guillermo del Toro. I mean, all of us. How can you not love Ray Harryhausen? But there was one point in later years where my friend Leonard Maltin did a piece about Harryhausen and interviewed him, and mentioned on Entertainment Tonight that he had never won an Oscar. Well, there was a school teacher named Arnold Cunert who was watching this. And he said to his wife, he was watching this on TV, he had no context to Hollywood, he was a school teacher. And he said, that's terrible that Harryhausen has never won an Oscar. Someone should do something about that. And his wife, wonderfully, said, well, why don't you do something about it? And what Arnold Cunert did was he got up a petition, and he reached out to people like Tim Burton, like Tom Hanks was a huge Harryhausen devotee, and he had them sign a petition saying Harryhausen deserves an Oscar. And that year, at that year's Oscar telecast, Tom Hanks presented Ray Harryhausen with his Oscar. So any of you who have a dream or want to do something that speaks to the people in film and TV that you love, or books, you know, if something's a crime that someone hasn't been honored, then take it in hand. Do it. You can do it. So Arnold Cunert actually met Harryhausen and became essentially his manager for the later years of his life, his spokesperson. And so all these Harryhausen projects were getting mounted, books and comic books and so forth. And and there was a book that came out called Ray Harryhausen, An Animated Life. This was in the early 2000s. And I saw the book. I loved it. I bought it, of course, and got it autographed. And it had an appendix, which is all the unmade projects. And I thought these were wonderful. And so I reached out and to Harryhausen and Arnold Cunert, and I said, I think we should do some of these. I think we should do Ray Harryhausen Presents and make some of these. And so a friend of mine was Chris Wyatt, and he had just produced Napoleon Dynamite. He was a member of the round table that I run, and a young man with a lot of ability. And so Chris Wyatt and I flew to London. And we met with Harryhausen at his house, which was quite wonderful. It was in a very posh section of London, and Harryhausen was a very gracious host. And we went into this house, and it was owned previously by Michael Powell, a very famous director who had done The Red Shoes and many other great films, Black Narcissus. And Harryhausen had bought it from him, and it was filled with wonderful pieces of artwork. In many of Harryhausen's drawings, his pre-production sketches, which if you haven't seen them, I urge you to look them up. They're gorgeous. They have this quality of foliage, and they have sort of this foggy look going into the background. And I have one of the prints, one of Harryhausen's lithographs on my wall, signed by him to me. And he was very influenced in his drawing style by Gustave Doré, who did wonderful illustrations in Dante's Inferno and the Bible and many, many other great books in the 19th century. And Harryhausen actually had an original painting by Gustave Doré in his house. And Harryhausen said, would you like to see my trophy room? And he took us into his trophy room that had all of the animatronic figures, all the stop-motion figures he had done from Jason and the Argonauts and Seventh Voyage of Sinbad and 20 Million Miles to Earth and all these amazing, amazing films that he had done. And they were, they're yay high, they're tiny. And the Hydra in that great fight in Jason and the Argonauts, the seven-headed Hydra. And again, now just to keep in mind how it worked, Harryhausen would stand there on a table with a tabletop model, and he would shoot frame by frame, clicking off the frames, 24 frames per second, and he would have to keep all those movements in his head, because if he got anything wrong, if there was any glitch, he'd have to go back and start all over again. And so it's an amazing, amazing testament to his brilliance that he could do these phenomenal sequences that he would see in his mind. And again, he was sculpting these wonderful figures himself, and making them out of, he'd first sculpt them in clay and then build the armature and then cast the armature out of, latex, foam, rubber, all of that, and then paint them himself. Amazing, amazing work. It was very much a one-man operation. These are films crafted by hand. And, so he had learned his craft from Willis O'Brien, and then gone on to make these spectacular movies. And so we pitched this idea of doing Ray Harryhausen Presents to Harryhausen, and he said, I'm in, let's do it. And so I started working up the ideas, and one of the ideas I came up with was a sequel to Jason and the Argonauts called Jason in the Underworld. And the basic notion of that was that Jason is now world famous because in the ancient world, because Orpheus, the great singer and poet, has been singing his exploits to the ancient world. So wherever Jason goes, he doesn't have to ever pick up a tab. Everyone, he's a hero. He's renowned. So then Orpheus's wife dies, and Eurydice, and she's in the underworld. Well, Orpheus knows that he can't go into the underworld and save his wife, so he goes to Jason and he says, "Listen, you owe me. You've been living high on the hog, and I need you to basically assemble the Magnificent Seven of the ancient world and go into the underworld with me and get my wife back." And bring her back up to the land of the living. And so that's what Jason does. And he gathers all these ancient heroes, these great heroes from antiquity. And they go into the underworld, and they have these amazing fights, these amazing sequences in this vast realm where they're fighting, the Cerberus, the three-headed dog, the giant three-headed dog, who's the servant of the Lord of the Underworld. And also Jason, of course, meets the daughter of the Lord of the Underworld, and they fall in love. And at the end, they save Eurydice, and they get. Oh, but one of the key things is that if any of our characters is killed, they ultimately become a servant of the Lord of the Underworld, and so they're on the other side now, and so it becomes an increasingly challenging battle. And in the end, they do save Eurydice. They get up to the land of the living, the surface world, with Eurydice and Orpheus and Jason and the daughter of the Lord of the Underworld, whom they've saved also and brought her here. But they decide to make the official story now be that they failed in their attempt to save Eurydice, and so that the official story will be that didn't work, so they can now live a quieter life and have a private life in addition to the public one. So that was the basic notion. So we went to Comic-Con and Harryhausen was there as a guest, and we met the heads of the Sci-Fi channel, and they were very enthusiastic, and they wanted to do a multi-picture deal. And like so many things in Hollywood, ultimately the financing could not come together, and the production company they married us with, it didn't work out. And I was very sad. I was very heartbroken about that it didn't get done. It didn't get made, because we were going to do a number of wonderful projects. But the challenge, of course, was to do them right. I actually had a meeting with John Copeland, who I'd worked with as a producer. He had been a producer on Babylon 5 when I wrote for that. And we talked about how we would mount these and how they could be done and what they would cost. And again, I didn't want them to be like the sci-fi movies of the week where the effects were cheesy and they were just kind of product that was generated that was, as good as it would be, and then on to the next one. I wanted these to be done as lovingly as Harryhausen's original films. And so it was a great sadness to me that these never got made. And eventually I'll post that outline for Jason and the Underworld on my website, and you can all read it. And but just getting to know Harryhausen, getting to be part of his world and see how he worked and how he acted. He was just a gentleman and just phenomenal. And I also, it was. At that time, then I moved on to of course, doing the book with Guillermo del Toro, and Guillermo, of course, loved Harryhausen too. And so in the backyard of Guillermo's house, Bleak House, which is filled with all of his wonderful items, there's a life-size bronze of Ray Harryhausen. And so basically, but the lovely thing about people like Harryhausen is he inspired all of us. And now, of course, there are dozens of people making amazing science fiction television shows and science fiction movies. But when Harryhausen was doing his work, this is before Star Trek, before Star Wars. There wasn't, he was out there on his own doing these films. And he told me some great stories. For instance, if you ever see Seventh Voyage of Sinbad again, they didn't have a lot of money. They shot it in Spain, and they couldn't afford to build a ship or rent a ship, so they used stock footage. So Harryhausen told me that every time you go back to Sinbad's ship, it's a different ship. It's stock footage. It's a different ship, and so and no one would ever notice it. And I'm sure that if you've seen that film, you've never noticed it. But now go back and watch that film, and you'll see. And it's just hilarious that it is different every single time. But it's so wonderful that Harryhausen got to make these films, that he and Charles Schneer teamed up. And he and Ray Bradbury were hoping to do more work together, but it never came to that. They actually had very different pursuits and very different enthusiasms, but they had the same heart, I think. And, it's a lot harder to do films of the fantastic than to just write books. And so what Harryhausen was mounting was even more spectacular and more amazing, I think, in certain ways than Ray Bradbury. Ray was one of a kind as well, and his work is phenomenal, too, and I love it dearly, and he was an amazing friend and a great mentor. But I'm so glad that I got to know both of these men, and that they got to know each other. Because when you think of them as two 16-year-olds becoming friends and spinning out their dreams of the future and their dreams of the past, and loving dinosaurs and getting to bring dinosaurs to the world in such a concrete way, and we now see the world of mythology and the world of the dinosaurs, and even in Mysterious Island, where you see that world of Jules Verne so well realized with Harryhausen's creations, the giant crab, the giant chick, the bird, this bird that they fight with, the giant bumblebee. It's, I think, because it was one man making these creations in a way that that they have an individual stamp that even something like Star Wars doesn't have. And Star Wars is brilliant in its way, and it has had a huge reach. But I think without Harryhausen, you wouldn't have had Star Wars, without these amazing, amazing creators who were all alone. I mean, Ray Harryhausen couldn't hang out with dozens of his compatriots in film. They didn't exist. He might run into George Pal every now and then, but that was about it. So, so I just wanted to tell you all about my experience with this singular man. And if you haven't watched Harryhausen's films, please go out and see them. They're charming, they're delightful, they're heartwarming, they're unique. There's nothing like them. And so that's really it for now. I wanted to thank Wintersbone for encouraging me to make this commentary. You can tell I love talking about this subject and these men. And also, even unmade projects. I mean, all the unmade projects of Harryhausen, even all of my unmade projects, some of the good ones get made, some of the good ones don't get made, but you keep on the path and you keep true to your heart, and that's the name of the game. Eventually, I'm planning on publishing a book of, I'm going to publish Marc Zicree's big book of scripts, which are scripts that did get made, and Marc Zicree's big book of scripts, which will be outlines and scripts for projects and series Bibles that didn't get made and may yet, because now that I have my studio, it's just a matter of reaching out to my fan base and getting stuff made. So if you want to request a commentary you'd like me to do, a piece you'd like me to do, just, like, share, spread the word. You can reach out to me on my Mr. Sci-Fi channel. Watch the other videos if you haven't seen them. We'll be doing one soon about George Pal, one about time travel, just everything and anything that interests me. And but Ray Harryhausen's now gone, sadly, but everyone dies. But his work is with us. And thank God there's DVD and downloadable content and all these great ways. Because when I was a kid, the only way you could see these films was either they'd be revived at a movie theater once in a blue moon, or you'd see them on TV cut up with commercials, and you have to wait. There was no way to watch a film that you loved when you wanted to see it. Now we have that great gift thanks to our technologies in this 21st century that we live in and we share. So until next time, it's Marc Zicree, Mr. Sci-Fi, Marc Zicree of Space Command. We'll talk to you soon, and thanks for sharing this wonderful, wonderful world of science fiction and fantasy with me. Bye-bye.